That means we've hit the record button. Good afternoon, all of you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon for, I think, probably must be about our 5th webinar now, and it's another action-packed one that we are bringing to you in collaboration with the City Council. And our purpose this afternoon is to impart practical information and help to your businesses in the restaurants, pubs, bars and takeaways, hospitality sector to help people get open, if you choose to, from the 4th of July. And of course, whilst we're doing that, keeping customers safe and keeping your own staff safe. We're very lucky this afternoon to be joined once again by council experts, and I'll introduce them in just a second. But I think from my point of view, I'm going to say that I know that all of the folk at the council have been working their socks off right the way through the crisis to help in every single way. And we are, so I think on behalf of the business community, I'm going to say it right out now that we're really, really grateful to all of you. The guidance for opening the retail, the hospitality trade came out late last night, and I think it sort of came out for most of us when our alarm clocks were going off at around about 7:30 this morning. Jonathan Bryce, you were first out with it, but I could see. So we're going to come across to all of you in turn, really to get your take on that guidance, and appreciating that all of us have only had it since this morning. So there is going to be a lot more reading to be done. I'm sure there will be more government guidance coming out, and there will be more learning and interpretation going on as we go through. So please watch this space and we will keep you all updated. We're going to go first of all to Jed Bell and Arlene Ainsley, who are the Cabinet Portfolio Holders for Investment and Development in the City Centre and also for Transport and Air Quality. So in very simple terms, they will give us some political insight. And in very, very simple terms, Jed really is most interested in what there is in the city for people to do, and Arlene on how to get them there. So that's very sort of Adrian Waddell thumbnail sketch. So Jed, can we come across to you first, and then you'll bring Arlene in. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Adrian, and welcome to everybody this afternoon. Yeah, I've been involved with the council for some 25 years now, and I've had many different roles, including that of chair of licensing and dealing with regulatory services. But I know the licensing trade. I wouldn't put myself as an expert, but I do know the licensing trade within the city and the regulations and litigation over the years which has been involved with that. My current post are that of Cabinet Member for Employment and Culture. Now, employment is investment and development. It's what brings jobs to the city and how we build the city for the future. Tonight, you're going to see at City Council the next part of our local plan, which is to drive employment forward and help develop the city in a correct way, which is the development allocations plan. That's part 2 of our local plan, which is a very important step for the city. But this afternoon, I'm here to listen to see what we can do together for me to act as a conduit between you and the policymakers at the City Council and my colleague, and see how we can improve things with the changing landscape that we seem to be getting from government more or less on a daily basis, of not changing throughout the day. So it is very frustrating, it is very confusing at times, but we're here to try to assist in any ways that we can. The city is returning to some normality. It's a different normality. And I think that will be the case for some time if ever we get back to what was the norm. I don't know whether that will ever be possible. But what we do is we will get back businesses within the city, and we'll make sure that it's safe within the city. So with my portfolio and with my colleague, who I'll introduce now, which is Councillor Arlene Ainsley, I'm sure that we can do that. Over to you, Arlene.
Right, I think I'm unmuted now. Thanks, Jed, and thanks, Adrian, for those introductions. As they both said, I'm Arlene Ainsley. I'm Cabinet Member for Transport and Air Quality. And quite rightly, I'm responsible for not only people moving around within the city centre, but also how they get to the city centre, and of course how they move around the city in general, you know, the other district shopping centres and so on. It's been a huge challenge working with Graham and the transport team to make sure we can get people to the city safely and make sure once they're there, they can move around safely with social distancing. As Adrian said, you know, there's legislation come out just this morning, or a directive just come out this morning, that we're all sort of trying to get our heads around, trying to interpret what that means for us, what changes we'll need to make. But I think alongside making all of those changes, we work very well together, you know, with the police, as Jed and I as cabinet colleagues, and of course with NE1 and all council officers. But we're really keen to engage with you as businesses for you to let us know what changes you think we should make. We are here to listen and learn from you. I have to say we've all been, including yourselves, I assume, on a really steep learning curve. I think quite a lot of the changes, we may not get it right first time, but we're really open to listening and learning and adapting those changes to suit your needs and to suit the needs of the city. The important thing is to get the economy going again, but to get it going in a very safe way, get people into the city, make sure they can move around safely. So that's sort of all from me, and I'll hand back over to Adrian. Thank you.
Jed, Arlene, thank you both very much indeed for that. We're going to go across now to, I suppose, our more resident experts. We are trying very hard to get Ed Foster onto the call. We've got some technical difficulties at the moment with him, but hopefully he'll be able to join us later. And Ed is the Service Manager for Public Safety and Regulation. So he will give us, I hope he'll be able to give us, when we can get him, some news on the current position and the new state of affairs. But in the meantime, we will hear from Stephen Wykes, who is the City Centre Police Chief Inspector. We will then hear from Jonathan Bryce, who is the Licensing Manager at the City Council. Many of you will, I'm sure you will all know Jonathan actually. And then we will also hear from Graham Grant, who is the Head of Transport. So I think without further ado, because I'm keen to get to your questions. Stephen, could we come across to you, please, just to hear about Northumbria Police's role?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Adrian, for the invite to take part in today's webinar. My contribution today is effectively relatively short. It is broadly similar to that I contributed to the earlier webinar that you hosted in respect of the retail core reopening. But clearly I will touch on our nighttime economy plans, and I'll touch on our role in the licensing world, if you like. The first point that I'm really keen to make is that we're taking a really supportive approach to plans regarding recovery. We've enjoyed excellent working relationships with all of those engaged in the recovery planning throughout the entire recovery phase, so certainly not just in terms of licensed premises. And from my perspective, that has been a very effective collaboration that has brought about some excellent outcomes in terms of retail restart. And I was really pleased to see that go so successfully. And of course, continue to go from strength to strength, no doubt. What we are not as a police service is leading on the policy and process adjustments in respect of licensing. And I know that Mr. Bryce and hopefully Mr. Foster, if he joins us, will cover those areas of business. But what is important, of course, as a responsible authority in respect of licensing, we do have a role to play. Decisions are made in respect of what may or may not happen with licensed premises and licensed space. And it's just important for me to communicate that regardless of the complex policies and procedures in place, we are taking a permissive approach to any changes proposed by operators and by the licensing authority as we move towards this phase in recovery. And what I mean by that is, unless we see glaring risk, or if we have very obvious concerns about crime and disorder or public safety, we are essentially saying we want to start by saying yes. Have a go, try your new ideas. New process and policy as proposed by the licensing authority will absolutely be supported by us, unless we see a glaring reason to say otherwise. And that's absolutely part of our supportive posture in terms of recovery more broadly. To address the 4th of July weekend more specifically, and to allay any concerns that some of the attendees and viewers of this webinar may have, policing absolutely will be present at that weekend. Clearly, you will all be aware that in terms of nighttime economy policing, we have withdrawn those assets and done slightly different things with them in the city. It would have been ludicrous to leave them all standing on corners with bars and clubs closed. They will be put back into place from the 4th of July to support that recovery phase. What we have been trying to do is understand exactly what is opening and to what extent, because that will obviously determine what level of resource we put into the city. And many of you have been incredibly helpful in replying to our licensing coordinators who've been asking questions around, are you going to open? If you are, for what degree of hours, and with what measures in place? Now, most of those questions that we asked were before the new guidance that was released just this morning and the announcements yesterday by government. And we absolutely appreciate that some of the answers we've had may now be different. So I would, I suppose, issue a bit of a plea that those of you listening in on this call, or those of you that maybe listen to it later, if you are planning to open, we would absolutely welcome engagement from you to simply notify our licensing officers through the normal channels that you will all be aware of, through the police licensing mailbox, or indeed, if Mr. Rice would prefer it, through the licensing authority, but one way or another to let us know that you are doing so, so that we can develop that picture and understanding of how busy the city is going to look in terms of open premises and for what hours. That will allow us to deploy the right number of assets to the right places, of course, and we welcome any engagement or views that anybody has in respect of how or where we do that. It is important to point out that, as I said, in terms of retail recovery, the police don't police social distancing. Now, during retail restart, that was a fairly easy message for me to deliver, because there were lots of very clever bits of infrastructure being put in place into the city, and lots of anticipation that there will be compliance, which there absolutely has been. I do recognise, and we recognise, that in a licensed venue where alcohol maybe starts to take effect, that there will be concerns around compliance with whatever measures may have been put in place at that premises, and that may manifest itself in a call for service from the police. Clearly, we would prefer that that is not the case, but we are supportive of the fact that whilst I start by saying we don't police social distancing, we will be supportive of venues who are maybe grappling with their initial plans and trying to seek opportunities to tweak them to make them better. So please know that we will be supportive of you. We will be helping out, if you like, advising where necessary, and recognising that this is going to be a bit of a suck it and see, if you like, with some of the measures that you may put in place, and we'll be sympathetic to the fact that there may be challenges. That is essentially as much as I wish to say, Adrian. To summarise, hopefully a very supportive posture from the police. You will see us in the city. We would welcome you telling us what you plan to do so that we can accurately reflect that with resource and asset. And beyond that, best of luck to you. Delighted to see the city starting to reopen in this regard.
Stephen, that's brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Completely note your plea, which is a call to action really for everyone who's on this, to please let the licensing authorities and the police know what your opening plans are, when and what your hours are. And I'll try to remember to repeat that at the end, and we'll let people know as well who obviously are not on this call. So Stephen, thank you very much indeed. That's a fantastic message for all of us to hear, so very much appreciated. I think if we can go across to some of the matters of more nitty-gritty matters. So Jonathan, can I come across to you first, please, and then we'll go across to Graham, and then fingers crossed we might have got Ed back on the call by then. Jonathan.
Thanks, Adrian. Adrian, I'm going to talk twofold here in the absence of Ed Foster at this point in time. By explanation, Mr. Foster, in his absence, is, as many of you will know, is the Service Manager for Public Safety and Regulation, and as such has a portfolio which is quite significant in covering the regulatory activity of commercial premises which incorporate licensed premises as a part. So as the Chief Inspector mentioned, Ed's been key to making sure that the regeneration aspect of businesses alongside Graham and the Chief Inspector have successfully re-implemented themselves over the past few weeks, which is a very positive thing to see. It's a little bit of a difficult and challenging time for us from the point of view that from the outset, we've never received necessarily overly clear guidance from the government about how we approach matters, and more importantly, how we seek to regenerate and support business in doing so. So it has been a case of us working diligently as best possible to try and establish a means to work with business and to get you back up and running as soon as possible, albeit not in the same guise that you used to trade in, but trying to, in any way possible, assist with expediting those matters. In Ed's absence, I'll advise that we are fresh to this guidance. I did send a very significant and blanket email to the whole of my trade contacts at some unearthly hour this morning to make sure that you had the guidance at its earliest possible time. And I'm still in the process, after a busy day, of reading it in some extent. I know that that Ed would give you clear direction and advice about the fact that safety is key and safety is paramount. Whilst we want you to open, and it's important that you open and regenerate and restart your business as soon as possible, there must be a degree of safeguarding measures put in place, which are outlined in the guidance which has come out this morning. And it's quite, dare I say it, whilst it's a little bit repetitious throughout the document, it does give some indication of the measures that's expected as yourselves as employers, not only for your employees, but also for customers who visit your premises. And there is a degree of complexity, and I will have to read that undoubtedly a few times before we can give any further queries or direction in that regard. But please know it is our aim to fully support you in that regard, in relaunching your business aspect and making sure that we can diversify it as best possible. That brings me on to a subject matter that's probably more comfortable for me in this respect. The Chief Inspector pointed out that my normal remit, as you know, is to receive applications on your behalf and to process those applications and to ensure that your business interests remain viable. I have, for the past few months, acted in a completely different guise as a regulator in serving notices on non-compliant businesses and making sure that they don't operate. And now I completely change tack and try and work with you as best possible to ensure now, with guidance behind me, I can try and provide any supportive direction in that regard. For many of you, that will mean significant business diversification. So whether that means through internal reconfiguration of your premises or whether through changes in licensable activity, the licensing authority remain open as far as engagement is concerned, either by means of pre-application basis or, as we've been focused on over the past few days and weeks, trying to move towards ensuring that your applications can be expedited through a means by looking to work within the prescribed aspects of legislation. The government has significantly encouraged external aspect use, and Graham will provide a more clear explanation in that regard. The licensing authority will work with the Highways Authority in making sure that there is space on the ground for you to have some external aspect, and the licensing authority will thereafter ensure that we process the relevant permissions for you within some revision of the prescribed timescales. It will be a case of very much us trying to think on our feet and trying to make things work, but I think we're starting to put the tools together to be able to write to you with support from NE1 to make sure that you can make the respective applications, and we'll try and provide you with a significant degree of support in that regard. Before I kind of hand over to Graham to give you a bit more of an explanation of what we'll call the pavement cafe aspect, what I want to explain to you is the normal remit and how we're going to depart from that normal remit. Licensing by its very nature is a very contentious, protracted and consultative process that can be drawn out with significant fees and a long-term duration, which is designed for benefit to ensure that residents are consulted and businesses are consulted, but at the same time can be somewhat prohibitive to your business developments. So what we've normally got on an application of a licensing nature requires a variation to change that business aspect, which can cost up to in excess of £1,900, depending on the rateable value. And thereafter, it can look at taking 28 days to progress that aspect. And similarly, there are significant costs associated with for pavement cafe locations and the relevant planning permissions. And what we're trying to do is to, dare I say the term, cut the red tape as best we can to ensure that we expedite processes by dealing with things on a minor variation at limited cost, expedited timeframes, and not necessarily reduced consultation, but a less onerous consultation process. And similarly with the highways permissions, likewise, the key aspect of this one is Graham's aspect in ensuring that the external aspect can be used in the first place. And once we get the relevant consents from the Highways Authority and the relevant permissions to do so, we will look to work with you to process those applications so you can use that space forthwith. I know that Councillors Bell and Ainsley are very, very much wishing to make sure that we work towards the 4th of July as a key time frame, and thereafter, as quickly as we can thereafter. By all means, I will probably come back to you, but I feel it's probably an important point to hand over to Graham just to kind of talk a little bit more about the pavement cafe aspect. And if need be, I'm more than happy to come back to the licensing aspect.
Jonathan, thank you very much indeed. I think there are. I can already see one or two questions coming in, so I can see there's going to be a bit for people to get their teeth into. Graham, can we come across to you, please?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you can see my screen there.
Yes.
Right, okay, Adrian. While I won't be able to talk with a great deal of certainty around some of the things that you'll be interested in within your own premises, because that's not my area. I'll get on to pavement cafes in a second. But one of the things that I thought would be useful to show you is that for those of you who've been in town recently, you'll have seen some of the signage that we've been putting up, which is we're trying to welcome people back to the city centre and encourage them to keep distance from one another, but not using really scary signage that's been signed off by government, which is kind of red and white signage about keeping your distance and so on. We want to try and encourage people to come back, but to be responsible when doing so. Part of the reason for showing you this is that we're creating currently a toolkit of the of all of this kind of signage that might be relevant for your businesses. So we will be providing online, and we'll share it through NE1, things like A3 and A4 printable materials, like the kind of thing that you see on screen, but also some others around welcoming people back that you may decide that you want to use because it carries messages that are useful in terms of queuing and things like that. So we'll make all of that available to people to use. We will also be providing additional vinyls for things like queuing, just like we have done in some of the city centre streets. Now, I guess on that, given that not all of you will have been on some of the other presentations and webinars that we've done, I thought one of the useful things to show you is the amount of streets that we're looking at implementing changes to in the city centre. So basically everything that you see coloured there with the monument at Monument, you know, the Monument Metro Station there, Haymarket up there, Central Station at the bottom, everything that we've coloured in is a street that the City Council is currently looking at putting interventions in place to enable social distancing alongside queuing or other space to be used outside premises. Because obviously with some premises you'll be less interested in queuing and more interested in other alternative uses on the pavement or nearby highway surfaces. We've been doing this, you know, we've been doing this period of probably for about 5 or 6 weeks. We've got 56 different streets just in the city centre that we've been looking at. In addition to that, we're looking at 8 different district shopping centres, road corridors that connect the district shopping centres and where people live to the city centre, and then we're also doing a piece of work around residential neighbourhoods. The point of me mentioning that is that basically we've got a huge amount of work on, and as Councillor Ainsley said, we're really trying to make sure that we get things right first time in terms of temporary measures, but we have to acknowledge we might not always do so. And what we're really keen to do is to enable feedback from the likes of you who are on this call, ideally through NE1, because it enables us to centralise the kind of feedback. And then on everything that we're delivering, we're having almost like a 3-week formal review point to determine whether or not significant changes need to be made to the design before we potentially upgrade the materials that we've used. If we identify things on a day-to-day basis that need improving on the likes of Northumberland Street, we do so, and we're not going to wait for 3 weeks to make improvements, but we are designing into everything that we're doing this kind of review point that enables you as businesses or representatives thereof to let us know where you think it's right, where you think it's wrong, and then we can try to upgrade the materials that we're using. Because in the first instance, we're trying to use easily accessible materials that we can get on streets quite quickly to try and help us out here, but with a recognition that because social distancing is going to be in place for a considerable period of time, it's very important for the city of Newcastle that we try to make sure that the materials represent and reflect the ambition that we've got for the city and the stature that we see for our city and the types of business that we want to do here. So we are going to be interested in making sure that if things are right on our highway design, that we then reinforce them with higher quality materials, things like planters and so on. Now, I guess onto pavement cafes then. One of the things that has been challenging is some of the legislation, and that legislation is clear in terms of the types of timescale that need to be used to before we can make judgments on some of the pavement cafe, the proposals that come into us. I think that the council is taking the approach that we are seeking to relax as far as we possibly can that approach, and working in liaison with NE1 to try and make sure that we again centralise applications so we can deal with a number of applications at the same time in one area, deal with it and move on to the next. We won't be able to manage every single application that comes in at exactly the same time, and so I'll talk you through some of the stuff that we're doing in the meantime. One point to make to all of us as business owners, as the Business Improvement District, police and local authority, is that if there are any local outbreaks of COVID-19 that come after the kind of the ending of lockdown and the relaxing of social distancing measures, it will be for the council and other local authority, it will be for the local authority for us to try and step in and enforce any local lockdowns. And that is something that obviously nobody wants to do, but may have to be done based on the evidence that we see and if there is a local outbreak of COVID-19. So for all of us on the call, both in terms of panelists and those of you who are running businesses, it's really important that we try to maintain social distancing so that we ensure that these kind of things don't happen. In order to work with you on that then, in terms of pavement cafe licensing, one of the reasons that providing additional outdoor space for many of you is going to be critical to ensure that you've got the tables and the covers that you need. We are going to relax as far as we possibly can our approach to this, but it will be on a temporary basis. And that's the only way that we feel that we will be justified in relaxing legislation and relaxing our approach to legislation is if it is on a temporary basis to deal with an emergency situation associated with COVID-19. And we need to make that point clearly to you so that people aren't expecting us to always maintain the same kind of timescales and an approach to pavement cafe licensing that we're going to be taking in the coming weeks. We've already received approximately 50 expressions of interest in developing new pavement cafe areas, and we're going to prioritise them by looking at premises within certain blocks. So primarily we're looking at what space we can provide in the likes of Grey Street and big market areas. We've also had a number down the quayside that we're looking at. We're also going to be looking at new variation applications on prime city centre locations where no amendments to the highway are necessary, and then other variation applications for locations. One of the key things with this is that for a pavement cafe, you've got to go through a process of getting so many different permissions. We are trying to streamline it as best we can. At the moment, what the transport team is currently doing is based on the map that I showed you before. We're looking at where we know we can provide space and how quickly we can provide that space to businesses. So we'll be almost making suggestions as to where they could go. That said, we are aware both as individuals and as an authority where the licensed trade is, and therefore we're using the locations of your business to inform the plans that we're coming forward with. The other thing is that because of the fact that the government only released the guidance this morning or late last night, and we haven't necessarily been able to go through all of it, we're also having to react and flex to different things that are coming forward. And one of the changes that we feel that we've been able to make has only come about based on a conversation about 12:30 today in terms of whether or not pavement cafes only have to be on the pavement or whether or not we feel that we could actually free up some road space to put pavement cafes on as well. So in the first instance, working alongside NE1, we will be compiling plans of where we think that we can safely and quickly provide additional pavement cafe areas and communicating those with you so that we can try to move them forward, and we'll just be moving forward on phases and bring in more as soon as we possibly can and we feel that it's safe. so based not only on COVID-19 and the social distancing requirements, but also based on highway safety as well. Again, point that's been made by Councillor Bell, Councillor Ainsley and Jonathan, and Stephen as well in terms of the police. We're really keen to work with you on this. If we make some mistakes early on in terms of the space provided, we can learn from that together. We will welcome your feedback, but equally, particularly from a highways perspective, we might have to recognise that some of the space will be more limited than you might ideally want, so that we can provide measures or infrastructure that help protect the public in case of anybody getting out of control in a vehicle and things like that. So we're going to work with you, and we're going to try and as quickly as possible. If I think Ed might be able to come on in terms of specifics around fees, if necessary, because I believe he is now on the call. Any questions about this, more than happy to take them.
Graham, thank you very much. Ed, great to see you. Can you just put your hand up if you can hear me? Not yet. Okay, so I think what we'll do, we'll continue working away to try and get Ed on. And in the meantime, we'll start going to some of your questions. And the first one.
I think it sounds okay now. If you want to go to Ed.
Ed, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yep. Very clearly. Okay. So, Ed, I don't know how much you were able to listen to your colleagues, but do please. I know you were going to give us an overview of the current position. So if you're happy to do that, do please do so, and then we'll go to questions. Thanks, Ed.
Yeah, apologies. I've been beat by Newcastle City Council IT. We tried this yesterday and it worked perfectly, but today they've decided that we're not allowed to use Zoom. So apologies for that. So the pandemic has hit us all hard, and there's been loss of life, and there's been a huge cost to individuals and to businesses and commerce. The high streets are really important to us, and the success of businesses. You are our customers, and we need to make sure that we get things going again. And I hope that so what we're trying to sort of help the best way we can to get businesses going again, and to support you. When you go back into your premises, things are going to look very different. There's going to be new designs. I think that the new fashion trend is perspex, and we'll see orders being given by phone apps. So the first stage is preparing your building. As businesses have been closed for some time, you'll need to sort of look at some key issues. And I'm going to send around the PowerPoint that I would have shown you, which has some key links. And there's guidance on there how to deal with your water system. You'll need to flush out your water systems, because with the systems being stagnant for some time, there'll be things like HACCP on there. You'll need to sort of look at your stock and review your food stocks. You need to look around the premises as well, because the city has been incredibly clean, so there may be pest issues around, and just make sure that your fire systems and gas safety systems are working properly. The other thing that we're going to have to think carefully about, that Graham has touched on, and you've seen with Northumberland Street how we've had to facilitate queuing. You'll need to think about the queuing for your premises, because the capacity of your premises is going to be reduced with the social distancing measures. And you need to think about the way that you control customers coming in. It's probably easier for restaurants because you can stagger your opening times. But with pubs, it may be that you have to go to some form of booking system to try and manage the way that people come in. It's interesting that the government have decided to begin on a Saturday. With other businesses, there's been the start on a Monday, so that there's been that sort of gradual introduction to reworking. But starting on a busy Saturday, I think that that's going to be incredibly difficult for you. So you need to think about the way that your customers are going to access your premises, and the layout of your premises as well, the tables, the distance between the tables. If if you haven't got a barrier there, then it'll have to be the 2 meters. But if you've got barriers and mitigation, then that can be 1 meter. You need to think about the way that customers are going to order, and whether you can introduce apps or texting so that orders can be done remotely and there can be table service by staff. And you need to sort of limit the movement inside your premises. If you think logically about the way that people move around your premises, that is the important thing to do. If you look at any of the shops that have reopened, the supermarkets, the floors are marked so that people know exactly the way that they're meant to move around, and that is really, really important. You'll see if you go into some of the shops that they've introduced hand wash stations at the entrances. And so table layouts and managing the people inside your premises, you probably need to dedicate a member of staff to managing the flow of people. In terms of tables, you can only have people from 2 households sat together and sat at one table. You probably need to, if you're a restaurant or got a food offering, you need to sort of take out the cutlery and the condiments with the meal. You can't leave things on the table, and you need to be constantly cleaning the premises. And then I think that we're becoming a cashless society, aren't we, with COVID? You need to think about payment and the way that things are paid for. At bar counters, you may need to sort of have somebody that takes the order, and then further along the counter where they collect the goods from, and how you're going to protect that member of staff serving at the counter if it's not going to be waitress service. The document that we'll send you the link for, it's only guidance at the moment. It's not legal, it's guidance. And so it's important that you follow that. And it goes through a tick list of how to reconfigure your premises, how to think about queuing and working with the local authority and managing customers on entry. One of the key things in the guidance is that there should be no live performances going on at the moment, and that is strongly emphasised in the guidance. There's a whole section, licensing always comes down to toilets, and there's a whole section about how you manage the toilets and how you manage people coming in and out. You need to sort of put in social distancing measures there, and probably a traffic light system so that you limit the numbers of people and the way that people queue for the toilets. And you need to make sure that there's hot water in there so that people can wash their hands and that staff have that. The second stage is all about preparing your workforce and doing the risk assessment. And the links that we'll send you have the health and safety guidance on how to do that. And it's just thinking through what we've just been through, the way that you manage your premise, the way that you manage customers, and the guidance that you're going to give to your staff. Once you've decided on your risk assessment, you need to discuss it with your staff. When we've put in our risk assessments for our staff, we've sat down with them and then chatted it through to see if the arrangements that we thought that would work, that they practically think that they would work. And we've changed our risk assessments 2 or 3 times. There's a story there that we've got the risk assessments working, and then our licensing office, the wall behind, decided to sort of almost collapse into our office. So we had to abandon the office after spending weeks preparing our risk assessments. The other thing that will arise is PPE and what PPE is necessary. A lot of people will, there's no need in a non-clinical scenario to wear face masks, but it may help staff to feel more comfortable if they were wearing some form of face guard. If you go into Phoenix, for instance, the staff there are all wearing a visor. If staff are going to come into close contact with people, think about the way that you protect them. The staff have got to feel comfortable and safe with the way that they're managing and dealing with customers, and that is something to put into your risk assessment. And whether you're going to make face masks available. So in terms of managing customers, you need to sort of minimize customer self-service, and the guidance says that really you should be looking where possible at table service. And then you need to sort of be thinking about your cleaning regime and managing the surfaces that customers touch. So you almost need somebody to go around cleaning door handles and empty tables all the time. And it's really important to keep the place well ventilated as well. And in areas like toilets, it probably will give staff and customers confidence if you put up on the wall your cleaning schedule. And if people, some people have been stroppy with the marshals on Northumberland Street, really, it's a Section 3 health and safety requirement that you manage your premises safely. And if you just make customers aware that you're under a requirement to manage your premises safely and for their safety and to stop the spread of virus if they'll comply with what you're asking of them. The other thing that the guidance talks about is keeping records of customers and also of staff. And there's some in the guidance, it talks about the way that you can assist with track and trace by keeping records of customers on the premises. I know that this is quite a controversial measure. Sorry, I've probably rushed through that after all the IT problems I've been through. I'm sorry, but if you've got any questions that you want to ask me, please feel free to put those to me, and I'll try and answer those in the best way possible. Thank you.
Ed, thank you very much indeed. There's an awful lot of extremely valuable information contained there. And actually the bit you missed at the beginning was that I said that we had all been reading it since our alarm clocks went off this morning. So you guys have had as much time, probably less with everything else that's going on, to actually sort of absorb some of this. I'm keen to go across and do some questions. Jonathan, you put your hand up there as a panelist.
Yeah, I didn't have a, don't worry, Ed. I don't have a question for yourself in that regard. I just wanted to provide some kind of add-on value to suggest that all these measures that Ed's talked about are going to require significant reconfigurations to your premises. So, where, for example, you had a premises before that would accommodate a set number of people in a set area, there is a thought that the premises will have to expand to accommodate that. Now, I don't want to start off by saying everything's going to be a minor variation, but which will expedite the process. But it will be a case of each one on its merits. But we will try and give you the best advice possible to try and take forward those reconfigurations. I've had a number of key conversations that have taken place in between meetings today, once the guidance is released, about how people will change their business setup and how they will change their configuration, not only expanding onto the highway that Graham's talked about, but also how they change the layout of their internal premises. With reduced numbers, or wanting to maintain the same numbers but use of spare rooms that they previously hadn't utilised. It's questions that were anticipated from Ed and I, but what I want you to be assured of in every way, shape or form here, that the relevant support will be there to provide you with clear advice and clear guidance from a licensing perspective of how you take those things forward. And we've also looked within the realms of legislation to try and expedite those matters moving forward. So by means of, as I've already alluded to, minor variation and trying to work within the realms of quite a strict regulatory regime. And that in turn is also offset by the fact there's a lesser cost associated in those processes. I just wanted to add that on to all the positive stuff, because I know it's a challenging and daunting thing thinking about how you put all the control measures on that Ed's kindly expanded upon in great detail. We can't necessarily give you specific advice on your own individual business and how you put those risk assessments. That is upon yourselves. But what we will say is where you need to reconfigure your premises to accommodate from a licensed business perspective, it is our aim to make that process as less arduous for you as possible.
Jonathan, thank you. I think one of the key points that will come out of this actually is going to be sharing good practice, and we'd be very grateful if, when all of you as businesses come up with your whiz-o ideas for how you're going to do stuff, please let us know, because as far as I'm concerned, this is very much, and I know colleagues at the council are absolutely on the same page, as indeed we all are. This is about getting Newcastle PLC open. really as a whole, and making sure that we can show that as a city centre we've got a great offer for people, and they can get in, feel safe, and get back to, we can all get back to doing the things that really we're in business to do. I think actually on the panelists chat, before we get into questions proper, there's one additional point which I think is extremely important that's been made, and that is where you know there's going to be a lot of focus on outdoor space, I'm guessing, where you think so. I think the point there is, please go and talk to your neighbours, because if we know that within an area, all the people who might want to use some open space, you could have all come to an agreement about how you're going to carve it up. It's going to make life an awful lot easier for the people who've got to determine those licenses. If people can't agree, and there's going to be some objections and all the rest of it, the whole thing's going to become a nightmare. So work with your neighbours, please. Right, we're going to go to some questions. There is a question. Stephen, I'm going to come to you with this one, but I do not want this to become a kind of police service interpretation of the yeses and nos. So there is a question about, I think, your role and enforcement. Stephen, I know you've covered that one off again, but if you might care just to reiterate what that is, please.
Adrian, excuse me, Adrian, I've seen the question, and I know that what it relates to, the question for, I don't know whether everyone can see the question, but essentially I've said police don't police social distancing, and in the guidance released this morning there is a paragraph in section 2.4 that says, where necessary, inform customers that police and local authorities have the powers to enforce requirements in relation to social distancing. When I saw the question pop up in the chat, Adrian, and for everybody's benefit, it's a very fair question. Having read that bit in the guidance, I'll be completely honest, I hadn't read that paragraph in the guidance, and I want to be very clear about what my message is in that regard. I have frantically emailed for legal advice, and I've had some reply, so I can give some clarity. What I mean by we don't police social distancing is there is no power in any legislation to police the 2 or 1 metre social distancing rule. So if someone rings the police and says so-and-so standing too close to me, we have no power to deal with that in respect of social distancing. We may have other powers available to us when we arrive, but not in respect of COVID. We also don't have a power to enforce against anyone if they walk the wrong way against an arrow that is put on the floor in respect of a one-way system to enforce social distancing on the highway. There is no legislation afforded to us to enforce that. So I am right to say that we do not enforce social distancing like that. The guidance that is submitted here, and far be it from me to wax too lyrical about this, but we also don't get information in a very timely manner at the moment. That guidance, when I've sent it to our legal department, is news to them. It may be that legislation is to be introduced that we don't yet know about. That gives us some sort of a power to disperse people who are failing to socially distance. But at the moment, we don't have that. So it's an intriguing paragraph to be in the guidance. What comfort I do wish to give you, though, is that if we have problems of disorder, whether it be associated to a lack of social distancing or whether it be anything else in our nighttime economy or as licensed premises start to open, we will use the powers we've always used to deal with that. I just wanted to make it clear that what we don't expect to be dealing with and what we don't want to be dealing with is lots of people ringing us to say so-and-so's walking the wrong way in the footpath or so-and-so standing too close to me at the toilet queue, because that is not a police matter. And that is something that we would hope is dealt with by, firstly, premises management and then other supporting agencies. I hope that covers that off, and I'm not going to go on much further, Adrian. I know you didn't want to make a big laborious point, so I won't continue beyond that, and I hope that clears it up. But we will be taking further guidance and instruction from our legal departments about what this guidance means.
Brilliant. Stephen, thank you very much indeed. Right, there is a question which I think probably, Graham, there might be a couple here for you, and if I can sort of take them in a group. So first of all, there is a question using an example from Westminster City Council, who have issued plans to close roads between certain times, in that case between 5 and 11 p.m. Aside from the plans for Grey Street, are there similar plans in Newcastle and also in respect of open spaces? So I think that's really around timings of road closures. There is another related question I have by someone who has a premises on putting chair who asked what are the chances of getting that closed to cars after 5:30 or after a particular time. And obviously, I guess the point there is that if as soon as the road is closed for traffic, it can be then used for tables and chairs. Your thoughts, Graham?
In part, it goes back to that point that you made, Adrian, about the importance of geographical areas of businesses working together to come up with a decent proposition that you can work with the council on, as opposed to expecting us to do everything about it because of the amount of work that we've got to do across not only the city centre, but also recognising that there's licensed trade on here from around the entire city. So we're not just looking at the city centre, we've got district shopping centres as well to consider. Pudding Chair, as an example, there are powers available to us as a local authority to close a road during certain times. And it is only under those kind of scenarios that we envisage that you could create space on the likes of Pudding Chair or High Bridge for additional outdoor space. Of course, if you've got one business that wants to see that happen and 4 businesses that definitely don't want to see that happen because it massively impacts on their loading, their servicing, or their staff, that creates an issue for us. And so the more work that businesses can do together to try and come to a unified proposition and work with the likes of NE1, the easier it will make it for everybody and the quicker we'll be able to get things in. In respect of pavement licenses, for example, we have to by law consult with the frontages of the properties around where we're putting in place a pavement cafe. And we have to do that, and we will do that. I think the point that Jonathan's making is that we're willing to allow those pavement cafes to go in temporarily while we complete that process. But we still need to do it. So if you're able to write to us noting, here are the contact details of our 2 neighbours and they agree with it and that, we agree with their proposals, it just makes everything smoother for everybody in terms of us being able to get it through. In terms of specific closures, we are open to that type of thing. We do have the legislative powers available to us, but there is always going to be a knock-on impact on other businesses and other stakeholders. And we, as a highways authority, have to take that into account. So again, the more that people can work together with us to try things as well, it might be the case that you try these things for a short period of time to see what the impact would be and then see if we can do more. And another thing that I would note just generally for everybody to consider here is that while I know it probably feels like it a lot right now, we'd also be interested in ideas as to how we could replicate this approach in terms of providing space to people over the Christmas period as well. So understanding what works and what doesn't work and so on to help businesses in and around that really important time for your trading is important to us as well.
Graham, thank you. I think also just trying to sort of answer 2 or 3 questions at once. Ed, I think this might be one for you. There is a question from someone who thinks that, or who, for whom it might not be practical to put up plastic screens in a restaurant. There is a related question about a requirement to take contact details and does that affect GDPR? And another one about playing recorded music. Certainly from when I read it, I think it was only live music, so I'm sure recorded music's probably all right, isn't it? Anyway, I'm not an expert on music. So.
Yeah, it's okay to play recorded music. It's just live entertainment and comedians and live acts that are banned. So it's okay to play pre-recorded music. In terms of the guidance on separation, when you read the guidance, it's so repetitive and it's obviously been produced in a hurry. But it talks about that you can reduce the distance down to 1 meter, but there has to be mitigation to reduce that down to 1 meter. And really what the government are saying with all of this is that it comes down to your health and safety at work duty to protect your staff and to protect customers. And you've got to decide what that appropriate mitigation is. Really, you're trying to avoid face-to-face contact of customers. It's breathing all over each other. That's what you're trying to avoid. So if someone's back-to-back at a meter and not facing, then the risk is fairly minimal. But you just need to think what your mitigation is and the way that you organise and mark out your premises and where people stand. And yeah, I think that there was another question on there about large gatherings. 30 people is judged as a large gathering.
Thanks, Ed. I think this isn't so much a question, but I'm going to read it out because I think it's important. Actually, my biggest concern is that customers will not accept or adhere to the policies and precautions in place. I would ask for a clear and concise message be passed to the general public that they must follow all guidelines that we put in place. Is that something that's being looked at? It's phrased as a question. I think it's something for all of our messaging, though, and that's us at NE1. I think it's the guys at the council, and I'm also looking at all of our participants. I think we just need a clear message that we're in strange times, aren't we? And they're going to stay a bit odd for quite a long time. So actually, I think rather as the public have become used to the social distancing arrangements on Northumberland Street, the same follows for how that all works in licensed premises.
Adrian, can I just add to that? I think it's a very important point. And the City Council will do what it can with its different platforms for social media and spread the word. Again, if we can work with NE1 and act as a conduit that way, that we can get the information from licensees that's open and some of the issues that they're coming up with, and we can help to keep the message, a consistent message across, but also, again, it's helping people to stay safe. So we would be more than willing to use all of our platforms and all of our media outlets. There's been a number of interviews that's been given, and we can keep on pushing that message.
Jed, thank you. And I think actually on a similar point, which we might take some positivity from, there was a maybe poll that came out late last week, and of 20,000 people surveyed across the country, two of the main takeaways for me were that social distancing measures are the most important for helping people feel at ease walking into towns. But also, when it got to specifics around the country, in the northeast, there were more than 60% of people had most missed being able to go to a restaurant or a cafe. So I think there's a huge pent-up demand out there. Right, so we're going to go back to the Q&A. Ed, I think probably another one for you on, does live entertainment also include the showing of live sport? Did you get that one, Ed? You're muted. We can't hear you.
Live sports is also not recommended because it's likely to get people moving around the premises and shouting. So the regulations recommend that live sport isn't shown in premises.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Tom. Do you have any idea yet roughly what percentage of bars, etc., that were open in the city centre pre-lockdown will be opening on July the 4th? I think, can I try and answer that one by saying, I guess we don't know. And that's why, certainly from Stephen and Ed, I know that businesses, we're very keen for you as businesses to tell us what your plans are, and particularly your dates. I know there was a question about how do you get in touch. If you don't know how to get in touch with the police and the licensing authorities, then just send us an email and we'll make sure that goes across, and that's info@newcastlene1ltd.com. Right, there's a question, again, Ed, I think probably one for you. It might be Jonathan. I'm not quite sure what the crossover is. Could you advise if restaurant licenses A3 and A4 have been expanded to cover hot food takeaway throughout COVID?
Yeah. A3 and A4, there is temporary derogation to do takeaway food sales. in terms of alcohol sales, then you would need to have that on your premise license. But we just need to be careful with the off sales of alcohol. In some parts of the city, the Ousburn, for instance, we're seeing the congregation of large groups of people, and it's causing ASB in the community. So we just need to be careful about off sales of alcohol. But yeah, with the food premises, it has been okay to do that. It's an ancillary use. I hope I've said that right. That my planning colleague is on the line as well.
Okay, thank you. Ed, I'm coming to you again with another one about contact details, and this might be a bit unfair because you might not. I wouldn't blame if you didn't know the answer just yet, given that this has all just come out this morning. So, so Julia, we might need to come back to you this one. But Ed, let me just try you. Is there more detail around the contact details we need to take? Is it just one member of the party or all? And what details are needed?
It's very, very vague, the guidance. And I think that you really only need one member of the party. We've really been operating track and trace for years on food poisoning outbreaks, as many of you will know. And you just need somebody from the group that is able to contact all the other group members. So providing you've got one member of the party, that should be sufficient to contact the others should the need arise.
Thank you. I think this might be a bit of Jonathan and a little bit of Graham. We might even answer our own question whilst I'm answering, but this is from Lorenzo. I would like to ask if the area on Sandhill Quayside, if we could use the cafe area next door to our premises as they're no longer basically not being used. And are there any changes to our cafe license boundary as it's on a pavement? I mean, that might be a sort of general answer as to how does someone apply for either a greater use of an existing license or new license.
Jonathan, do you want to also cover the costs issue as well, which I know you've answered online as well, because that would be useful for people?
Well, first and foremost, what I will always say is if the space is permissible, if Graham and the highways team think the space is permissible, then we'll look to try and work with those aspects to change the relevant requirements of the premises license that's associated. So the costs were beforehand quite extensive from the point of view that a pavement cafe was in the cost of £615, and a premises license variation could cost anything up to £1,905. So what we've sought to do is we've sought to try and expedite those matters and reduce the costs by going to an £89 minor variation and it's, as I say, on a case-by-case basis, and also to reduce the pavement cafe costs from £615 to £300. But the starting point for me every single time about the use of external spaces, if Graham's team can give me an indication that the space is permissible to be used, then I'll do my utmost to work with it to try and make sure it's in situ as soon as possible.
So Lorenzo, on that, it would be worthwhile contacting us. I mean, ideally what we're trying to do is to get information through NE1, because then we're centralizing it, and part of the way of us potentially being able to reduce the fees is because of the fact that we're doing some of it on geographical areas, which means that the amount of time that we're spending as offices is reduced slightly because of the fact that we're looking at it on a wider area. So if you get in touch through NE1, they're holding a central database and spreadsheet of all of the licenses that we're having. We're working through that with NE1, and then we'll get back to you as soon as we can about whether or not that would be okay. In principle, it would sound okay, but we'll have to look at it in specifics.
Graham, that's exactly right. We have a growing list of those of you who have indicated that you'd be interested in using outdoor space or more of it than you might have already. It's early days for this, but we're also working with Alan Hillary Events, although please don't contact him directly, do it through us, so that where possible we can pull together clusters of outdoor spaces. So for example, the Big Market, Grey Street, possibly High Bridge, Broadchair, outside the gate, places like that, where there might be several premises who all together would like an outdoor license. And if we can pull all of that together into one application, that will help speed things up at the council end, and we think there's also a very good chance that we can do that on the basis of one cost only, which I'm happy that we pick up. I think I'm happy that we pick up until I get inundated and then I run out of money. so I'm not giving an absolute guarantee, but that's the way we're trying to do it. So do please let us know what you would like to do. Jonathan, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, the only reason I've got my hand up on that one is the fact that, well, there's 2 points to clarify. The first one is what we're looking at here is, and I said it's a short term measure. And when I say short term, it's a 6-month measure we're looking at here. The aim is we can review this when we get to the end of that 6-month period to see if it's been permissible and if it can continue thereafter. But my short term goal is to make sure that you get yourselves on your feet as soon as possible, but with a short-term measure, and that allows us to expedite matters. And the second point to say is just purely and simply, whilst we've tried to remove all the burdensome aspect of premises license applications and the cost implications of it, whilst we can make let's call it an umbrella application for certain areas of the city, from a licensing and from a hire-based perspective, we'll still have to go through, albeit in situ with businesses in place by that point in time, we will still have to go through the arduous individual consultation process with respect to those businesses. Okay,
Jonathan, thank you. I'm conscious that we're over time, but actually there are still some questions out there. So I'm hoping, Jonathan, Graham and Ed, you might all still be okay to stick around for a little bit longer. That would be brilliant. Well, thank you very much indeed. There are 2 questions that both relate to capacity, so I'll read them both out. And I guess, Jonathan, this is one for you, I think. So does that mean that the capacity for every venue is 30 and no more than 30 people can enter a venue at any one time? And then that's related to the second question, which is, you mentioned that 30 people is a large gathering. However, if my venue can open safely with 2-meter spacing between all tables and service areas, and I have calculated a capacity of 150 people, are you saying that isn't allowed? Do we know?
I don't mean to be rude in responding to this, but I'm going to defer to Ed to primarily answer it, and then I'll come back as far as the relevant fire safety risk assessments are concerned, which are also key to anything we take forward. But I think Ed's probably better placed to advise from a health and safety perspective with the associated risk assessments, etc. Because risk assessment on an individual case-by-case basis will be key here.
Thank you. Okay, Jonathan, thank you. Ed?
Yeah, I think the large gatherings are referring to things like weddings and that kind of event, rather than the capacity. I think it's down the start of the guidance just talks about you working out the spacing requirements that you feel that you have in your premise with the measures that you're going to put in place. So if you've got space for 150, that would be okay. If you wanted to convert your nightclub on the somewhere like the Riverside and put tables in there, that's a huge area. You could do that, and as long as you've got the right social distancing and managing the risk. And in terms of the number of people sat at each table, it's 2 households that can sit at the table. I don't know how you're meant to know if everybody belongs to the same 2 households. Outside, you can have up to 6 people, but inside it's 2 households. So I think that is the answer, that you decide what the capacity of your premises is, and then you go with it. But if you want to hold functions like weddings, then it's 30. Okay,
Ed, thank you. Right, there's a question about, rather as the retailers have, are premises allowed to put stickers on the pavement directly outside to help organise customer queuing? Graham, I think that's one for you, isn't it?
It is, and it depends on the location. We do want to track where people are putting things on the highway, because we do need to make sure that it's appropriate. We will be providing examples of vinyls that you can use, but would ask that ideally in those kind of circumstances, if you're thinking about putting anything down, please speak to anyone and ideally email us at transport@newcastle.gov.uk before doing so that we can check that it is in line with what our plans for the area are. Because the last thing that we want to do is, if we're going to come in a few days later, like many of the district shopping centres where we're going to be rolling out changes in the coming 2 or 3 weeks, if you've gone and put down queuing vinyls and we then have to burn them off again, that's not ideal. So if you could be in touch.
Thank you. There's a rather, I suspect this is a sort of technical question about a requirement to keep customer records for 21 days. So guidelines state that premises are to keep a temporary record of customers for 21 days. Is this an enforced requirement? I guess that's, you know, how do you distinguish a guideline from a law? And I'm not sure. So Ed, is that one for you again, please?
Yeah. It is just a guideline, and I was talking to Lizzie Ord, who is my health and safety specialist, and she was saying that on social media there was a lot of discussion about what is law, what is guidance, and I think that keeping the track and trace information, it's best practice, and it's about giving consumers confidence that you are managing COVID. And in the PowerPoint, there's a little sticker that's on the health and safety website to show that your premises is COVID compliant. And I think that in the early days, it might be good to do that in the first few days to try and give customers confidence that you're doing your best. But I appreciate how hard that is going to be, and I think that Saturday, the 4th of July, is going to be an incredibly busy day, and taking the names of everyone coming into a premise is going to be really, really difficult. So yeah, I appreciate it's difficult, but it's best practice and guidance rather than something that would be enforced.
Okay, thanks, Ed. There's an interesting question I thought about I think really referring to door staff. So in terms of specific conditions on licensing in regards to large amounts of security staff or other conditions as such, which were introduced due to busy nights, will this affect premises now, and will they still be enforced? So I guess, you know, conditions when the night time was very, very busy, can that be relaxed? Will that be relaxed, I suppose, allowing businesses an opportunity to save some money?
I think well, the chief inspector's gone now, and he's the key advocate in many respects in relation to door supervisors, etc. in that regard. What I would say is the licensing authority will coordinate and consider any measures that a business wants to take forward if they don't think there's a necessity for conditions to be in place any longer. A lot of the questions that are on here today are about trying to not necessarily, I wouldn't say waive, but to amend conditions so they suit for the new business environment that's there. I would say we're receptive to any proposals that want to come forward, whether they come forward via a pre-application basis or whether they come forward as part of a minor variation application. But what we've got to make sure is it's a case-by-case basis. So, you know, a bar, as Ed points out, in a busy point of town that has a condition on it that's going to require lots of people to check off lots of names, etc., may require that condition to remain in place. Other conditions, for example, in relation to opening windows and allowing on-street activity, will have to take into consideration the noise and environmental impacts that are going forward. So each one on a case-by-case basis, but when I'm sitting before you today saying that, you know, the local authority are very receptive to proposals and will try and make them work as best possible.
Okay, Jonathan, thank you. I'm going to wrap this up quite quickly because I know everyone's got probably piles of emails to get through. I'm just going to try a few more quick ones. Ed, I think one for you about quizzes. Does a quiz count as live entertainment?
I think you can get away with a quiz as long as you don't get people too excited. I think that is what it says, that it's getting people excited and sort of shouting that they're concerned about. So I think a quiz, as long as you keep it calm, it'll be fine.
Okay. And David, I'm going to come to David's question, which is at the end, and I think we'll make that the last question. And in fairness, Ed, you may refer to something that you said earlier on about weddings, and in this case, a 50th birthday party. So David's question is, other than weddings, can you allow gatherings of up to 30 people for a celebration such as a 50th birthday party? If so, do these guests need to be socially distanced at 1 metre, or can they mingle as would be expected at either a wedding or a party?
That's a really, really hard question. I think it's like musical chairs, isn't it? That you can have the two households together at one table, and then you would have to move. Everybody else would have to keep at the 1 metre distance. So I think it's about the way that you have to think through how you're going to manage that event and try and make it as safe as possible. But yeah, I think it would be like musical chairs. That's when the music stops, you go into that spot where you can talk to people.
Okay. All right. Well, look, I hope we've managed to get through just about everyone's questions there. I know there might be one or two that I'm afraid we haven't. So please forgive me. Can I, on your behalf, please thank everyone, all of our panelists who've joined us. Those of you who are watching, thank you for your questions. Please let us know what you're doing, when you plan to open. I think we all need to make sure that we get the expectation management right. As I said, there's an awful lot of pent-up demand for bars, pubs, cafes and restaurants amongst our customer base in the Northeast. We really want to give them a really good show, but do that in a way that is going to be making them feel safe and them feel comfortable. So that's absolutely key. And I think my sort of key final point is that it's really this point about being Newcastle PLC. So it's really important we all work together. And as you've heard from the team, where you want to get outdoors or do new things, there is an awful lot of support from all quarters for this. Do please make sure you're talking to your neighbours about it as well, because it'll make life an awful lot easier when applications and so on are being considered. So finally, Jonathan, Graham, Ed, Jed, Arlene, thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. That's it. Let us know any further questions, points, and we'll try and feed them in. But thank you so much, all of you, for your contributions and for joining us this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed.